Good morning, everyone. My name is Courtney Lobel, and I'm the Chief Development Officer of the Middle East Institute. I'd like to welcome you all to the 11th edition of MEI's virtual briefing series on the Israel-Hamas war, which will focus on the Houthis' continued attacks on merchant vessels in the Red Sea. Since October, MEI has worked hard to provide you with expert analysis on every dimension of the conflict each week. And this morning, I'm pleased to introduce two of MEI's distinguished senior fellows on national security. Kevin Donegan is a retired Vice Admiral and former commander of the Navy's Fifth Fleet, and Sam Mundy is a retired Lieutenant General and former commander of the Marine Corps Forces Central Command. You can find their full bios on MEI's website. Thank you both for agreeing to join us today for a discussion about maritime security in the Red Sea, which comes at a particularly important time. When we get to the question and answer portion of today's briefing, those of you dialing in can indicate you would like to ask a question by using the raise hand function in Zoom. Questions can also be submitted anytime during the call via the Q&A chat box on Zoom, and I'll read them aloud to our speakers. I'll go over all of this again in more detail later in the call. But first, I'd like to turn to our speakers and invite you both to provide our listeners with a better understanding of the situation at hand. Admiral Donegan, to kick this off, would you take a few moments to put the attacks in the Red Sea into perspective, what we are seeing unfold, and what does it mean going forward in terms of global impact?
Well, thanks, Courtney. First, it's great to join you, and thanks for just putting on this forum. Another great event being put on by MEI, and it's certainly very timely given the events we're seeing. So what I'd like to do is just take a few minutes and put into context, as you said, what we're seeing, set the stage a little bit, maybe tease out some questions here for follow-on questions because of what I talk about. But first, I just want to start with the Red Sea in general. And we all know where the Red Sea is, right? It sits to the west of Saudi Arabia and Yemen, and it sits to the east of Egypt and Sudan. But when I think of the Red Sea, instead of the Bab el-Mandeb Straits specifically, which are in the south, I think of it as the gateway to the Suez Canal. In other words, commercial shipping traffic to go through the Suez Canal, whether that's either drive up to the north into the Suez Canal and into the Mediterranean, or come down to the south from the Mediterranean to go to the east, they have to transit through the Suez Canal. So think of it as access to the Suez Canal. And what we're seeing now with this pressure of attacks on commercial shipping in the Red Sea is that the shipping industry is left with a choice. Do I continue to take the risk of transiting the Red Sea to get to the Suez Canal, or do I not do that? And do I avoid the Suez Canal altogether and divert around Africa and then up through the Atlantic or the opposite transit in the other direction to go wherever my destination can be? And quite frankly, we've seen the shipping industry now not like the risk that they're seeing in the Red Sea. And many of the large shipping companies are deciding to divert around the Horn of Africa. You're seeing Maersk Shipping do that. We've seen BP announce that they were doing it back in December, and there's other shipping industries that are deciding not to go through. And to be quite frank, it then leaves us with a definite impact in the global supply chain. So to put the transits of commercial shipping through the Red Sea and Suez Canal in perspective, it's 15% of the world trade that flows through the Suez Canal and Red Sea. It's 12% of oil shipments. It's 30% of the consumer container cargo. All moves through that waterway to get to the Suez Canal or transit from the Suez Canal elsewhere. And we saw this once before. So if we want to understand impacts of what this can mean to the global economy, we only have to take a look back to 2021, when we all remember there was a motor vessel called the Ever Given that got sideways in the Suez Canal and blocked the transit of the Suez Canal. It did so for about a week. But analysis after the fact by really, really smart people have determined that the impact on the global economy of the stoppage of flow through the Suez Canal for just that week averaged about $10 billion a day to the impact in the global economy. So that really puts in perspective what we're facing today. If this continued pressure of attacks by the Houthis continues, you're talking about that kind of impact in the global economy. Now, we may not be seeing it instantaneously, but we're going to start to see it in schedules starting to slip, costs beginning to rise. They already are. Insurance costs beginning to rise. And we have some shock absorbers to the global supply chain that can delay a little bit the impact of this. But for certain commodities, there is no shock absorber. For instance, for liquid natural gas, it's a just-in-time commodity. It travels on a smaller numbers of ships. There's not excess capacity, and liquid natural gas is really needed now for the European continent, given the pressures that they have due to the war in the Ukraine. So that's what we're facing is we're seeing now this impact on the global economy that's going to come and increase. So what has the international community been doing about it? Well, I think everyone's aware that the U.S. and 20 other nations announced the formation a few weeks ago of what's called Operation Prosperity Guardian. That's an international coalition of the willing that's job is, or what their mission is to try to protect the free flow of commerce and allow commercial traffic to flow through the Red Sea. Notably absent from that coalition, of course, is some regional players, significant ones, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Egypt, for example, that we can talk about maybe in the QA questions and answers of why they're absent. But what's been the impact now of Prosperity Guardian? Well, we haven't really seen and didn't see after that announcement a decrease in the Houthi attacks into the Red Sea. Quite the contrary, we've seen an increase in the attacks in the Red Sea. And we learned that the number and frequency of traffic through the Red Sea, combined with the length of the Red Sea, the time ships have to spend in the missile envelopes of these Houthi weapons as they transit the Red Sea, that dwell time is long. And in summary, we have too few ships and too many Houthi weapons and too much time of transit to be able to completely escort and protect all the ships that go through there. And that's what's caused many of the shipping companies or the large shipping companies decide not to continue to travel through there. And then on January 3rd, 14 countries got together and basically issued an ultimatum. They said to the Houthis that they bear the responsibility for these attacks in the Red Sea and will be held accountable. What was the reaction to that? Well, that very night, the Houthis sent an unmanned explosive boat. Basically, think of it as a suicide boat. They did this back in 2016 and 17, and they sent that out to the shipping lanes to go ram into a commercial ship. And then we saw last night probably one of the largest attacks that the Houthis have made into the Red Sea against commercial shipping. And Central Command has said that they had to shoot down 18 drones, 2 cruise missiles, and a ballistic missile just to thwart that attack. So it's not abating despite these things that we've done already in terms of from the international community. But so where does that leave us going forward? Well, it leaves us in a place that we understand because we've known it and seen it in other theaters and other areas. Defense alone is not going to be the answer to stopping the attacks and restoring the flow of commerce in the Red Sea. We have to move to a place where we can somehow deter the Houthis from attacking or neutralize their capability to attack or change their will in some way so that they don't attack. So the problem gets a little bit complex when we start talking about that, but perhaps we can explore a little bit about who the Houthis are, what their connection is to Iran, because with me today is also Lieutenant General retired Sam Mundy, and he and I have spent a significant amount of time in the region specifically focused on Yemen, and he has great experience and understanding of the Houthi capabilities. So Sam, over to you.
Thanks, Kevin. And Courtney, a pleasure to be here as well, to be reunited with my former boss at Fifth Fleet, Kevin Donegan. Let me just start briefly by talking a little bit about the Houthis. And, regardless of where you come down on the what I'll call the Houthi sympathy scale, simple, misunderstood mountain tribe, or at the other end, diabolical proxy of Iran, two things now seem clear after the last several weeks. Number one, the Houthis have have kind of moved up in the world. They've moved up from being a regional problem to being a much more dangerous actor on a global scale for all the reasons that Kevin just mentioned. And the second thing that is clear is that I don't think anyone questions their alignment with Iran. There used to be some great discussions about whether they're 5 are Shia, not 12 are Shia, and they don't, they're not under Iran's religious authority. Very clearly, they have decided to work within Iran's broader strategic approach here with the conflict in Gaza. And of course, we've seen Iran's hand behind this with several interdictions of illicit weapons shipments. In fact, I would argue that the reason that the Houthis, I don't think there's an argument actually, I think it's blatant and obvious that the reason why the Houthis have such a formidable arsenal is directly due to Iran's material as well as non-material support. That's the technical support, the knowledge and all that sort of thing. The Houthis didn't suddenly graduate missile technicians and engineers from Sana'a University in 2019, and now they've got a robust industry. If you look at the pictures of any of these weapon systems, and you can Google them, they bear a remarkable resemblance to the same designs called by a different name, perhaps, in Iran. So the international response, Operation Prosperity Guardian, there's different metrics for that. I think the one that counts is, well, there's two that really, and I don't want to take anything away from the outstanding performance of the sailors that are out there shooting down the one-way attack drones, cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles. They've been very good at that. But in terms of stopping the Houthis, as Kevin just mentioned, it hasn't. Since then, the Houthis have only become more defiant. We saw that yesterday with this very large-scale attack. There's no reason to believe that they're going to stop. They've made bellicose rhetoric to that effect. So the problem is clear. How do we stop? How do we compel the Houthis to stop these attacks, these brazen attacks on international commercial shipping? The solution that we proposed in our article, we wrote an article about 2 weeks ago about this, is also fairly straightforward. In addition to playing good defense, it's time to add a little offense, perhaps a lot more offense. And others, of course, have commented on this. And we used as an analog, we went back to the 2016 incident where a U.S. destroyer was fired on by the Houthis. They shot an anti-ship cruise missile at it. And of course, it was the USS Mason. The Mason shot that down. And then within, I think it was 3 days, actually, we responded. So in addition to the defensive shoot down, we responded with an offensive action, and that was several Tomahawk missiles against Houthi radar sites. So as a first measure to adopt going forward, we need to go after the Houthi infrastructure, to go after the systems and the weapons that are causing such such damage to the flow of commercial traffic through the Red Sea. Kevin Donegan and I also believe that perhaps quietly but unmistakably, we need to let the Houthi leadership, the leaders of the Ansar Allah movement, know that they could possibly be facing the same fate as the popular militia force leader in Baghdad faced if they don't stop with this nonsense. That certainly needs to be on the table. That we hold them responsible, and we're going to take actions if necessary to ensure that they don't do this in the future. We also, in our article, proposed the consideration for redesignating the Houthis as a foreign terrorist organization. I know some people have written that that's problematic and could pose, a challenge to the ongoing peace process with Saudi Arabia. I think it's would not be in the Houthis' interest to do that, and there are other reasons why it just wouldn't make sense to allow the Houthis to hold that hostage over their illegal, unacceptable, and profoundly destabilizing, those are the words out of the U.S. administration, these attacks in the Red Sea. And I'll just note, I woke up this morning, maybe the news was out yesterday, that the UN plans to vote on condemning the Houthis and telling them to stop. And I think that's good. That's great for legitimacy, but it'll largely be symbolic because the Houthis have ignored UN resolutions in the past. So in order to reestablish deterrence, we need to compel the Houthis to stop. And that certainly needs to be done sooner than later. So that's it. I'll turn it back over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen, for your framing remarks. At this time, I'd like to open up the discussion to callers on the line. To ask a question, please use the raise hand function in Zoom. Keep your hand raised until I call on you so that I know you still have a question. When I call on you, you can unmute, state your name and affiliation, and direct your question to one or both of our MEI scholars on the call. You can also submit questions via the chat box on Zoom at any time, and I'd be happy to read them. While we give people a chance to raise their hands, I'm going to start with a chat question from Amy Oberhelman of Target. She has a few questions, so I'll start with the first one. Why did Middle East countries not join Operation Prosperity Garden, specifically Egypt and Saudi Arabia?
Well, I'll start with that, Kevin.
Sure.
As I understand it, the issue with Egypt is because they're so closely involved with supporting the Palestinians, of course, through the Rafah crossing. They would have some very real concerns about what joining might do to the Arab Street in their country, and they also bear a direct cost. We haven't talked about that. Nearly $10 billion worth of passage fees they get for allowing ships through the Suez Canal. That's probably the nature of her call. If it's such an economic impact to them, at what point do they become involved? But they've obviously looked at it and said, okay, the greater concern is that we want to maintain our sort of neutrality here. With Saudi Arabia, I mentioned the peace process with the Houthis, and they're at a good place. I think a much better place than they have been over recent years with the civil war in the country and their involvement in it. And as I understand it, they would be reluctant to join the Operation Prosperity Guardian out of fears that the Houthis might kind of pull back out of that peace agreement. I would note, though, that the Saudis have asked for restraint in whatever response this international coalition decides to take, which doesn't mean not taking action. It just means being restrained. And so it seems that they're kind of given a half nod to me. They're given a half nod to further action.
Courtney, I'd say that there's, just to add exactly to what Sam said, and I couldn't agree more with his response. When you look at Egypt, that they're faced, it shows the complexity of the world and the complexity of the situation, right? Because certainly both Saudi and the UAE and Egypt are huge proponents of the free flow of commerce. They have to be, right? Their economies and the world economies depends on it. But now you have the complexity of the conflict in Gaza and what that means and whose side are you on and things like that. And Egypt in particular is in a complex situation because when you look at it, about a third of the cash that comes into Egypt every year is coming because of this what they get to charge for traffic through the Suez Canal. So it's a direct impact on their economy. And as it's a difficult time, right? It's a difficult time to import wheat for them. It's because of the conflict in the Ukraine, and it's all connected. But in the end, the longer that we allow the Houthis to continue to control or impede passage through the Red Sea, it's problematic for all nations, not just one or the coalition that's in Prosperity Guardian.
Thank you. I have a couple of follow-up questions here in the chat, one of which I'd really like to know the answer to. In regard to the ships attacked last night, what shipping lines are moving ships through the Red Sea, as I thought all major carriers were rerouting ships? And the second follow-on question was, at one point, does Egypt engage if this impacts revenues generated by the Suez Canal, which, Admiral, I think you started to touch on that.
Yeah, could you say the second one again, Courtney? I missed the second one.
At what point does Egypt engage if this impacts revenues generated by the Suez Canal?
Yeah, I think I just covered that one for sure. But on the first one, I don't know specifically which shipping lines are or aren't, because it's hard to really track that for me in the position that I'm in. But there are shipping lines that aren't part of the majors. There are minor shipping lines and other shipping lines that are unaffiliated that move, and some of those are continuing to flow. And as you would expect, if you don't, there's something you could kind of take a look at. There's a way to look at what ships are transiting what passageways, and you can look at it over time. And it's really interesting to see right now, because if you take that snapshot and you take a look at it, what you see is that where there used to be a solid line of ships that flowed north and south through the Red Sea to the Suez Canal, you now have seen that shift over to around going south and around Africa. So regardless of the fact that some are still flowing, the majority of traffic, or too much of the traffic, is having to flow around it right now. And that's what's going to cause the problem. So yes, some are flowing. I don't know exactly which ones, though, Courtney, or which shipping lines are still active.
And I don't know either. It's a great question. Actually, prompts me to go look that up after this. But I think the count is up to 18 shipping lines. At least that's what I read yesterday. And coincidentally, the very large Chinese government-owned shipping company COSCO announced, I think it was yesterday, that they are also now going to divert. I think that's a major development. That's only one source I read. I can't confirm it, but if true, that's a major development and another indicator of how damaging this is.
Thank you. We have a lot of questions in the chat, so I'll try to speed through these. The next one's from Robert Worth of The Atlantic. Do we know any more about Iranian targeting assistance to the Houthis?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, and Sam and I can tell you, because we studied this problem extensively all the way back from 2016 on, that back then there was all this question on what is the Iranian support that the Houthis get, and who controls them and such. That notwithstanding, I thought Sam did a phenomenal job explaining the ties to Iran. There is absolutely no doubt that the Iranians are supporting the Houthis with intelligence on who's going where. And for a couple reasons. One, the Iranians have a ship that's always at anchor and in the Red Sea, and its job is intelligence collection. And we know that information flows from that ship to the Houthis. The second is the fact that Iranians put another ship into the Red Sea. But more importantly, it's just the understanding of how to apply weapons in situations like this that the Iranians can help and have helped the Houthis with. And that's the destabilizing point. It's not that they're supplying weapons because the Houthis need them for self-defense. Remember, they're not a nation state, and they're using these weapons to destabilize and attack free flow of commerce. So I would say quite openly and bluntly that the Iranians are supporting them in any way that they can, and have been since 2016 in both procuring the weapons, learning how to use them, and where they can, how to target them, how to target them at the right things. At the same time, I'll tell you, that's a tough problem. It's really difficult, even for a sophisticated Navy, to pick out which ships to hit when you have a lot of ships flowing north and south. Think about a traffic jam going by and picking out one car in the traffic jam. That's the dilemma. So it's not an easy problem to do. And even with intelligence, I'd say the Houthis are hard pressed to select exactly which ships they're going to attack. Instead, their attacks are probably into an area they want it to go in hopes that it'll hit the ships that they want.
Yeah, I know. If I could just add, it's been interesting to me to see how random or indiscriminate the attacks have been. That the Houthis stated that they're going to engage or attack ships that have Israeli interests. But if you actually look at the ships that they've, I don't know if they were intentional targets, but certainly in the line of fire, it's completely random. Ships flagged from all over the world with no apparent interest at all with Israel. So it is kind of a fascinating to watch them shoot seemingly just kind of scattershot out there to disrupt more than anything else.
Our next question in the chat is from Sylvia Samore, a bit related to what you were discussing. She's a political analyst for ENI. She's wondering if you see any other motives in the Houthis' attacks other than the conflict between Israel and Hamas, and if the resolution of the conflict in Yemen might diminish their willingness.
So I'll start, Sam, and then maybe you can add on in terms of the willingness and the conflict. A couple things. There are motives that the Houthis have that go beyond this. One of the chances they have when they launch weapons is, is death to America. So certainly that's, I would say that the U.S. is, and a chance to attack the U.S. In this way is appetizing to them to some extent. Of course, there's the thought that they, that they raise their stake on the world stage, so to speak, that they have a weight to throw. And I'm always a believer that if we can get an agreement related to peace between the Houthis and Saudis beyond just the current ceasefire and truce, that can be stabilizing and have a much broader impact and impact their motives here, to be quite frank. But that may be more hope than it is actuality. I'm not sure, but I'm a believer that that would be a positive step. So my great hope is that there's still a way to get to a solution to that crisis. But I'll go back to say that, remember, the Houthis aren't the elected government of Yemen. And although they're not in the U.S. doesn't have them designated as a terrorist organization anymore, in my opinion, they are, and they have been designated by the U.S. in the past. So their motives are to do what they're doing now, to disrupt, to attack the U.S., to attack other interests, and make statements and do more of what you would see Iran do. And I think that's one of their motives.
Yeah, I didn't catch the second part of your question. Could you repeat that, please?
Would the resolution of the conflict in Yemen diminish their willingness in these attacks?
The UN resolution, is that
the resolution of the conflict in Yemen?
A resolution of the conflict diminish their attacks? I don't think so, because they're not under pressure right now from what we used to refer to as the Saudi-led coalition, and that was a number of countries in addition to Saudi Arabia. So they're not feeling any pressure from the Saudis. Nothing essentially would change. They're not doing this. They've stated again pretty clearly why they're doing this, and it doesn't have anything to do with the conflict in Yemen. So I think the two are delinked.
Thank you. Our next question in the chat is from MEI trustee Lou Hughes. Realistically, given the mobility of the Houthi missile infrastructure, does the U.S. military have the ability to significantly degrade Houthi capabilities? If so, why haven't we used it? And why is there a lack of will to do this?
Well, I'll start maybe, and then Kevin, you can jump in. So John Brennan, former CIA director, just last week said he's confident that we have pretty good intelligence on at least the Houthi infrastructure on some targets. And if I implied earlier that it would be easy to do that, it's kind of the same in reverse for us. It wouldn't be easy. It would take some time, but we have the skill, we have the experience certainly to do this, and we have the capabilities, the assets to do this over time if necessary. So right now, I'm fairly confident, having worked under the CENTCOM umbrella, and based on what I've been reading in the open source press, that they've probably developed a number of targets that would be suitable in this case, and they presented those as options. And then, we're waiting for a decision on this. Over time, of course, as those targets begin to move, and some of them are mobile already, they become more challenging to find, locate, and hit. But again, I think we've got the experience to do this, and frankly, the Houthis know this, having seen what we did with terrorist threats, Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, for example, for a decade. They know that we are quite good at this. Nobody is better at this than us, frankly.
So, Courtney, I'll take it in a different path, because I think Sam did a great job on the tactical side of can we impact the Houthis, and I agree with him. I think the second half of that question goes to why haven't we doing it, and haven't we done something, et cetera. And there's, that's a complex question. For one is, I believe, and I think the administration believes, and that this isn't just a U.S. problem, right? This is a global problem. This is the free flow of commerce that's going to impact globally, not just the U.S. So building up a coalition of those that agree that action is necessary is important, and that takes some time. And you saw that when we went from building Prosperity Garden to building this ultimatum we issued of 13 or 14 nations. So that takes some time. The second half goes to that is there's a concern, and it's been raised by many, that attacking into Yemen can escalate the conflict, into the broader Middle East that's currently going on in Gaza and Israel. And there's different sides to the fence on that equation. I happen to be on the side that not taking action risks escalation, because it puts escalation control in the hands of the Houthis and the Iranians, as opposed to in the hands of us. In other words, we control escalation as opposed to allowing them, because what can happen is unintended consequences can be these missiles get through, ships start to blow up more directly. That's the free flow of commerce impact. The second one is we could take casualties in the United States. That would force a hand, so to speak, even more greater than we have now. You can't continue to just shoot missiles at missiles. The cost equation doesn't work in your favor. But I believe fundamentally that not taking action is allowing the Houthis in Iran to set a new normal for what they can do for destabilizing actions that will just invite further destabilizing actions. So the why we or the international community aren't doing more is a question for the leaders of those countries, and it's a difficult one to answer. But the dilemma is real, and we can see what inaction has brought us. It's brought us more attacks, not less.
Let me just add that is there any reason to believe that the Houthis wouldn't resort to this approach in the future if they don't get their way with something? And the answer is pretty clear to me, no. So there's another reason for taking action, or answering the question, what's at risk if we don't take action?
Our next question is from Rafiq Lata of Energy Intelligence. He says in the chat, so am I correct in saying that there have been no attacks thus far on oil products or LNG? If that is the case, is that not strange? Maybe a tacit understanding?
Hey, it's a great question, and I wish I knew the answer. But I haven't heard of a reported attack on the oil on an oil tanker. And in the past, in 2016, 17, 18, the Houthis were directly attacking Saudi oil transports that were going north in the Red Sea. Some of it may be intentional. Another portion may be just pure luck, because, as I said, their ability to target actual specific ships, I don't put in the high category. So again, second is, of course, we're defending ships that are most important, as best as we can. I would think there's some priority for defense. I don't know exactly what the coalition has laid out for that. And then if you look at it, some have diverted some of those ships so that they're not they're not there. The quantity of them is not going in that direction as there were before. But it could be intentional, I guess, is my answer. But they're not capable of intentionally not targeting them because they're not that discriminate with their targeting.
Our next question is again from our friends at Target. Where does China stand on the disruption in the Red Sea? And I'm going to shorten this question a little bit for time. Are there additional U.S. Navy resources being repositioned in the Middle East that leave a gap or opportunity for China to take steps towards reunification with Taiwan, or more aggressive steps in dominance in the South China Seas?
Yeah, that's a big question that maybe we can do at a different session related to China in the South China Sea. But for certain, China has their really only operational overseas base just south of the Red Sea in Djibouti. So it shows you how they view the strategic importance of the Red Sea. They also have been working to try to protect their own vessels. And for years, we have a communication path between the Chinese working and and Fifth Fleet in the coalition of the CMF. It's information sharing. I don't know if it's going on here with this particular operation, but China has never participated in one of these coalitions, which is telling in and of itself for their motives. Their motives are to take care of their own, probably more than anything else. But China does recognize the strategic importance here of the Red Sea. As I mentioned, their only overseas operating base that they have is Djibouti, and they've been growing that. I don't see a gap in U.S. forces, not now, quite the contrary. I think we have more U.S. forces. We have the right amount and what's needed for U.S. forces for us to do the missions that we have now in the area. Sam?
Yeah, I think what I would just add is that China's watching this very closely. I mean, I mentioned the COSCO diversion, but they're also kind of doing what they're stepping back and, allowing the United States to lead this international coalition. But they're watching it from the perspective of potentially with Taiwan. And on this, I would just say that, our words have to have meaning. And so far, I quoted the administration, illegal, unacceptable, profoundly destabilizing. Then, of course, Kevin mentioned the ultimatum. At some point, if you want your words to deter in the future, and particularly as it relates to other potential areas, they have to carry the weight that would allow you to deter whatever the threat is. And, I'm reminded of when I was thinking about this last week, the British philosopher Thomas Hobbes, covenants without swords are but words and of no use to a secure man at all. And I think, with prosperity, I was thinking of it in terms of prosperity guardian and the announcement and all that sort of stuff. But I do think that there's a lot at stake here with other potential actors around the world.
Our next question in the chat is from private investor Tom Charters. What role is Jordan playing in the neighborhood? If one of you wanted to address that.
Sam?
Well, just what I've read is, they've taken they're not pleased. Of course, it's always good to remember that about half their population is Palestinian Arabs, and so they're not happy with what's going on in Gaza. They're providing airdrop humanitarian assistance, and that's all. Every little bit helps, although airdrop is just a drop in the bucket relative to what the needs are and what you can deliver by ground and certainly by sea. But I think they're again, just what I've read, that they're advocating for for the conflict to end, and if and as an intermediate step, certainly to try and get more assistance in terms of the proximate issue that we're talking about here. I'm not clear on anything that they're doing as far as trying to stop the Houthis or prevent the Red Sea attacks. They were a member of the Saudi-led coalition years ago. Had a small token force that was a part of that, but they pulled out of that, I think, at some point a few years later.
We have a hand raised from my colleague Bilal Saab from the Defense and Security Program. Let me unmute you.
Hey, Courtney, can you hear me?
Yes.
Gentlemen, this is a first-class briefing. Thank you so much for the insights you guys have provided. I want to take you to an ideal world where you actually get the willingness from the Saudis and the Emiratis and the Egyptians to actually contribute. But then we get into the problem of capabilities. So in your own estimate, assuming that there's a desire to contribute, do you think that they're at a point where they can actually contribute, not necessarily in kinetic ways, but perhaps intel to make this maritime coalition a little bit more successful or effective? Is this a wake-up call for them to actually start seriously investing in maritime capabilities? Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Bilal, and a great question. First, I think they could contribute, significantly for lots of reasons. We in the past have worked closely with both Saudi and the UAE, for example, and Egypt in coalitions based out of Fifth Fleet and the Combined Maritime Forces, the CMF, and they have been all good contributing members, both in leadership and in understanding. Think about it, if in the scenario, in the perfect world scenario you talked about, think about Egypt's and the intelligence they would have on and the understanding of flow through the canal and when it's coming and the rest and how it's moving and the rest. Think of the proximity of understanding that the UAE can bring because they've long understand what's going on in Yemen, as does Saudi Arabia. At the same time, the intelligence they could bring is just part of it, but they also have forces that they could help with escort duties. They're more than capable of doing that. We've worked with both their navies in the past. We'd like to see more capability in all of those navies, and I believe they're all taking steps to get there and to become more interoperable with the U.S. and the coalition. So I see that they would be contributors, and then from the standpoint of symbolically and a unifying this understanding that free flow of commerce is important to all nations. Doesn't matter what conflicts are going on elsewhere. When you talk about impediments to free flow of commerce and attacks on commercial shipping, I think that's in everyone's interest, and this would help de-link this from other activities that are going on, especially the war in Gaza and the rest. That this impact on the global economy is definitely in the interest of all those nations, including the three that you mentioned. Sam, any comments?
Just Bilal, yeah, again, great question, and Kevin's much more suited to talk about the navies of the region, but it does beg, I think, for increased attention to their naval capabilities. They also, the Saudis in particular, of course, kind of back to the peace talks. You know, they can talk to the Houthis, and so there might be some moral, not support, but the moral conduit to get in and shame them to a degree. Not that we could expect that to have any impact, but if not a direct participation in Operation Prosperity Guardian, they probably have other ways that they could participate in stopping this.
I think we have time for one more question before we hit the hour mark, so we'll take this one. On an operational level, what is the best way for companies to communicate with CENTCOM and other military forces tasked with protecting maritime trade routes in order to mitigate risk?
Yeah, that's great. As you can imagine, if you're setting up an operation like Prosperity Guardian, they've already laid out for the international community the methods to communicate with them. And matter of fact, I believe they've even held video webinars with the shipping lines and industries that transit the corridors to flow information, because it's a two-way street. It's a flow of information of how Prosperity Guardian and this coalitions can help, and it's also a flow back of intelligence and information that the shipping industry sees in their transits and how they come up for distress. So there are pre-established methodologies for this that the combined maritime forces have established and put in place and been used for a long time. And when they have an operation like this, they open up other methods. So the first method would be to work through the combined maritime forces and Operation Prosperity Guardian out of Manama, Bahrain, and that they're going to find an open door because that information path is already established.
What he said, he knows a lot more about that than I do. But anyway.
Great. Well, I think we'll wrap it up here. Very robust question and answers in the chat from our participants this week. If you have any other questions, callers, that you didn't get answered today, please feel free to email my colleague Thomas Halverson at thalverson@mei.edu. He'd be happy to send them to our two experts on the call today and make sure you get your questions answered. I hope you all join me in thanking Kevin Donegan and Sam Mundy for participating in this week's session on Red Sea Briefing. We really appreciate your insights and willingness to share your morning with us. If you've missed out on any of our 11 sessions so far in this series or wish to watch them again, you can find recordings and transcripts on our website. So thank you all again for joining, and please look out for an invitation to next week's call, and have a good rest of your day. Thank you.